It rained the day we buried him. Not the kind of rain that lashes at windows or soaks you to the bone, but the quiet kind, thin and steady, as if the sky couldn't help but weep along with us. People came in dark coats, murmuring the same soft words I couldn't remember 10 minutes later. "I'm so sorry. He was a good man." "If you need anything," I nodded, smiled faintly, thanked them. My voice sounded mechanical in my own ears. I kept my eyes on the coffin, afraid that if I looked away, he might vanish twice. The priest's voice droned on, and the wet earth seemed to breathe under my shoes. Afterwards, the house felt too large, too quiet. His coat still hung by the door, as though he might walk in and shrug it off at any moment. A cup sat by the sink, the last coffee he'd made. I couldn't bring myself to wash it. The first night without him was the worst. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the tick of the clock. Each second felt like a tiny hammer chipping away at the life we'd built together. Days passed in a haze. I cooked without tasting. I answered calls without hearing. The world outside moved forward, but inside my walls, time was a stagnant pool. It wasn't until the third week, when the rain returned, that I found myself climbing into the attic. I don't even remember why. Perhaps to find old photographs for the memorial. Perhaps just to escape the echoing rooms below. I didn't know then that I was walking straight toward the one thing that would change everything I thought I knew about him and about us. The attic smelled of cedar and old winters. The single bulb overhead flickered as if reluctant to stay awake, casting long, trembling shadows across boxes that hadn't been touched in years. Dust swirled in the air, each particle moving like it had all the time in the world. I knelt beside a trunk of Christmas ornaments and began rummaging half-heartedly. My hands were cold. My mind was elsewhere. That's when I saw it, a small wooden box wedged behind a battered suitcase. It didn't belong here. I would have remembered it. The wood was dark and smooth, the brass latch tarnished with time. There was no lock, yet I hesitated. Something about it felt private. I told myself I was just being silly. It was probably old bills, receipts, or photographs. But when I lifted the lid, the scent hit me first, a faint trace of his cologne, still lingering after all these years. Inside, neatly stacked, were envelopes. Dozens of them. The first bore my name. I knew his handwriting instantly. That looping L, in Laura, the way the ink pressed slightly heavier on the downward strokes. My fingers trembled as I opened it. His words spilled out like a voice from another life. Sweet, tender, unguarded. He wrote about the way I laughed when I burned toast, the way my hair smelled after the rain, the way my hand fit perfectly in his. By the second letter, I was smiling through tears. By the third, the smile was gone. It wasn't my name on the envelope. It was hers. A name I had never heard before. I froze. My heartbeat grew loud in my ears, drowning out the patter of rain on the roof. I shouldn't read it. I knew I shouldn't. But my hands moved anyway, as though they belonged to someone else. Her letter was different. He wrote to her in the same warm, familiar tone, but there was something there he had never said to me. A kind of hunger, a recklessness I didn't recognize. I stared at the two stacks of letters, mine and hers, and felt the room tilt slightly, as if the house itself had lost its balance. I closed the box, then opened it again. And just like that, I was no longer a widow mourning her husband. I was a woman standing at the edge of a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to know. That night, I couldn't sleep. The box sat on the dresser like a living thing, heavy with secrets, waiting for me to open it again. I tried to tell myself I would leave it until morning. But at 2:17 a.m., I was sitting on the floor in my robe, the letters spread out before me like an autopsy. I read mine first, as if they could shield me from what I knew was coming. His words to me were soft, familiar, wrapped in the kind of tenderness that had defined our years together. But even as I read, I found myself searching for differences, for signs of what he hadn't told me. Then I picked up hers. Her name, Evelyn, was written in the same hand that had once traced the curve of my cheek. The same ink that had written, "I love you," to me countless times, now spilled across pages meant for another. I read one, then another, then 5 more. With each letter, my mind filled in a woman I had never met, the way she might have laughed, the scent she wore, the sound of her footsteps. The intimacy between them was undeniable, and yet there was no clear confession of betrayal, just a love that lived in shadows. Days began to blur. I would tell myself I'd only read 1 or 2 more, but hours later I'd be surrounded by open envelopes, my coffee cold, the house dark. My fingertips smelled faintly of old paper and faded cologne. I started to notice patterns. His letters to me were steady, reassuring. The voice of a man building a life. His letters to her were fire, urgency, the kind of raw, unfiltered desire that made me feel both jealous and hollow. I told no one. I smiled when friends visited, nodded through their condolences, but all the while, the box was calling me back upstairs. It wasn't grief anymore. It was something sharper, something that kept me up at night and made my hands shake during the day. One evening, I caught myself whispering her name out loud, just to hear how it sounded in the air. Evelyn. It felt dangerous, like speaking it too often might summon her. And maybe that's exactly what I wanted. The letters became maps. I didn't read them for the love anymore. I read them for clues. A street name slipped in casually, a cafe described in passing, the mention of a particular brand of tea she liked. Every detail became a breadcrumb. I started a notebook, one side for his words to me, the other for his words to her. Dates, references, patterns. I felt like a detective and an intruder all at once. My handwriting grew cramped from the need to capture every scrap of information before it faded from memory. In one letter, he mentioned meeting her by the river where the willows leaned toward the water. I knew that place. We'd walked there together once, years ago, in late summer. The idea that he had been there with her twisted in my chest, part pain, part pull. Some letters were signed with yours always, others simply with his name. I studied the difference in endings like they might reveal his heart's loyalties. I searched her name online. There were too many Evelyns, but one in particular caught my attention, a photographer whose work had the same softness I saw in his descriptions. Her bio said she lived 2 towns over. My pulse jumped. For days I debated. What would I even say? Hello, I'm the widow of the man you might have loved in secret. It sounded absurd, cruel even. And yet, I couldn't stop imagining her face. Would she be young? Older than me? Would I hate her on sight? Or would I understand? One evening, I found myself standing in front of my closet, choosing a coat as though I had somewhere to be. Somewhere she might be. I told myself it was just curiosity, that I wouldn't approach her, only see her. But deep down I knew, if I found her, there would be no turning back. I saw her before she saw me. It was late afternoon, the sky a pale, winter gray, and I was standing across the street from a small bookstore cafe. The kind of place where the glass fogs from the warmth inside. She was at a corner table, bent over a notebook, a cup of tea cooling beside her. Even from here, I knew it was her. The tilt of her head, the loose hair falling across her cheek. It was exactly how he had described her, in one of the letters. My breath caught. For a long moment I just watched. My hands were buried deep in my coat pockets, my fingers clenched tight around themselves. The street noise faded until all I could hear was the thud of my own heartbeat. Finally I crossed. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly as I stepped in, and she looked up. Our eyes met. There was no shock in hers, just a stillness, like she had been expecting me all along. I walked toward her table, each step heavy and deliberate.
My throat was dry.
When I reached her, I stood there for a second too long, unsure of what would break first, my voice or my resolve. Evelyn. She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. I'm Laura, I said. I was his wife. Her hand tightened slightly around her pen. She didn't look away. I know, she said quietly. The world tilted then, not with anger or betrayal, but with the unbearable weight of standing in front of someone who had loved the same man you did, and knowing there was no undoing it. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The silence was thick, filled with everything we might say, and everything we never could. Finally, she gestured to the empty chair.
Sit.
And I did. We talked for hours. At first, the conversation was careful, like stepping barefoot across broken glass. She told me how they met, a chance encounter at an art exhibit, nothing planned, nothing expected. How they started writing to each other, at first innocently, then with a tenderness that grew too deep to ignore. There was no confession of betrayal in the way people imagine it. They had never run away together, never made promises they couldn't keep. Their love, if that's what it was, existed in the space between letters, in the might of beans. I hated her and I didn't. I envied her, and I pitied her. And, to my own surprise, I recognized something of myself in her. The way she spoke about him. The way her eyes softened when she said his name. At one point, she reached into her bag and placed an envelope on the table. This was the last one, she said. He wrote it 2 weeks before. Her voice trailed off. I took it with trembling hands. The handwriting was the same, but the words inside were different. He spoke of endings and beginnings, of gratitude, of the ache of loving two people in different ways. And in the final lines he wrote, "If the two of you ever meet, I hope you'll see what I saw. Not rivals, not enemies, but two mirrors reflecting the same light." When I looked up, her eyes were wet. Mine were too. We didn't hug when we left. We didn't promise to stay in touch. We simply stood on the sidewalk, the cold air curling around us, and nodded, a silent agreement that we had both carried enough. That night, I put the wooden box back in the attic. I didn't lock it. Some letters should stay unread, but some will stay with me forever.